Have you ever felt divided between the love for someone and the duty to protect them from themselves? Have you ever wondered at what moment a person you raised with so much care began to become unrecognizable? In today's video, you will get to know the story of Teresa Ramirez, a grandmother who walked into her son's house at the exact moment he was yelling at his granddaughter of only 6 years old, and in that instant, had to make the hardest decision of her life. This is not just a story about family conflicts. It is about silent courage, about how the instinct to protect can be stronger, even than the fear of losing. While watching this video, you will find yourself reflecting on the limits between respect and omission, love and responsibility. You will understand how seemingly small attitudes can reveal deep truths and change the course of an entire family. If you have ever swallowed pain so as not to cause confusion, if you have ever hesitated between speaking or staying silent to keep the peace, or if you feel that something wrong is happening near you but still don't know how to act, stay with me until the end. This story may bring you clarity, strength, and perhaps even the courage you also need. I was never one to meddle in other people's lives, not even my own son's. I always thought each person has their time to learn, and that sometimes a mother's silence is worth more than 1,000 pieces of advice. My name is Teresa Ramirez. I am 64 years old. I am a retired teacher, and I live much of my life dedicated to the education of small children. I raised Andres alone, after his father left when he was still in diapers. I worked hard on a tight salary, but I never let love be missing. And maybe that is why what I went through that Saturday hurt me so much. It was supposed to be just another Saturday. I always stop by the bakery very early, buy the bread Luna likes, bring some children's books, and arrive around 9. But that day I woke up earlier than usual. I can't explain it. It felt like something was pulling me. I left home before 8, bag on my arm and my heart a little tight, without knowing why. When I turned the corner of Andres's house, I saw that the front door was ajar and muffled shouts were coming from inside. I approached slowly, thinking it might be a couple's argument, but as soon as I set foot in the living room, my stomach turned. Andres was standing in the middle of the room, face red, fists clenched, yelling at Luna as if he were facing an adult. The poor girl trembled in a corner, her little hands wet with soap. From what I understood later, she had tried to clean the bathroom to help, but forgot to rinse the floor properly, and he slipped. That was all. Just that. But he spoke as if she were a burden, as if that 6-year-old girl were a disgrace. And what broke me inside was seeing Paola's 2 children sitting on the sofa, laughing at Luna, as if everything were a show. I stood, frozen at the door, my body locked. For a moment, I thought I was going to vomit. And what came to my mind, in an almost cruel way, was, is this the son I raised? I couldn't say anything at that moment. I only set the bag on the floor and walked over to Luna. She looked at me with tearful eyes and ran into my arms as if fleeing from a fire. I hugged her so tightly it felt like I could protect her from everything. And in that embrace, while Andres was still talking, something inside me broke. An old trust. An illusion. Something I don't know if it will ever return. I don't remember exactly what Andres said next. I think my brain shut off. I only saw his mouth moving and that hard look, as if he were in a trance. When he realized I was there, he seemed surprised, but he didn't shut up. He even tried to justify, saying the girl needed to learn, that nobody helps at home, that he slipped and could have hurt himself. And I there, holding Luna, trying to understand what my son turned into. This tired, impatient man with no empathy. Paula appeared in the hallway, crossed her arms, and didn't say a word. That's when I asked Luna to go play in the backyard. I whispered in her ear, kissed her forehead, and she went out slowly, her little eyes still wet. When she disappeared from my view, I turned to Andres and let everything out. But I didn't yell. I'm not like that. I spoke in the way I always spoke to him, since he was little, firm, direct, without detours. I said that what I had seen wasn't discipline, it was cruelty. That he wasn't educating, he was humiliating. and that I wasn't going to cover it up. Because if he learned anything from me, it's that children we protect, we don't destroy. He stayed silent. Paula huffed, turned her back and went into the bedroom. And me? I sat on the sofa, looked around, and realized how cold that house seemed. As if Luna's laughter were the only living thing inside. I felt such a great deep sadness that it seemed like a part of me had been torn out, and at the same time, a certainty grew in my chest. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I couldn't keep coming there every Saturday, smiling, reading stories, and pretending my granddaughter was safe, because she wasn't, and I knew that now. I got up from the sofa, went to the kitchen, and took my cell phone. I opened the banking app, right there, standing, without ceremony. I went to the transfers tab and cancelled the automatic debit for the house's financing. Yes, because until that moment I helped pay a large part of the installment. They had never asked explicitly, but they insinuated. And I, as a mother, helped. Only at that instant I realized I was supporting a house where a child was mistreated, and that I would not do anymore. I didn't say anything. I just cancelled, and put the cell phone back in my pocket. When I left the kitchen, Andres was leaning against the wall, head down. He didn't look me in the eye. And maybe it was better that way because I don't know if I could bear to see the boy who once called me Mummy with such affection there. I simply said, I'll come back to pick up Luna at 3. We'll spend the afternoon together. And before he could say anything, I left. The door was open. The sun was strong. And the street noise reminded me that the outside world was still real, even when the inside of us seemed to collapse. I went straight home, but I couldn't sit. I walked back and forth, my mind racing. I replayed the scene. His voice, Luna's eyes, all mixed with old memories of when I worked 3 shifts and still invented stories just to make him sleep smiling. Where did I go wrong? Did I pamper him too much? Or did he just get lost amid life's pressures? The truth is I had no answers, only a deep pain and a feeling of urgency. Luna needed me more than ever. I looked in the closets, separated some small clothes I kept of hers, toys that stayed here from other visits. I'd prepared everything as if she were going to sleep with me that night, although I still didn't know if that would happen. But I wanted her to feel she had a safe place, that she wasn't forced to stay where she didn't feel good. At 2:30, I went to get her. The gate was locked. I rang the bell and waited. Paula was the one who opened. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, holding Luna by the hand, but said nothing. She just released the girl and closed the door. Luna hugged me tight as usual, but this time it was different. She said nothing on the way, only held my hand firmly. When we got home, I prepared hot chocolate, cut slices of cake, and we went to the living room rug, where we always read together. But before opening any book, she asked softly, "Did I do something wrong, Grandma?" That cut through me like a knife. I took a deep breath, held her little hands and said, "No, my flower. Who was wrong was the world today, but you weren't." And in that instant, I knew that Saturday had changed not only the course of my life, but hers too. Later, while she was drawing at the kitchen table, I sat in the bedroom looking at the ceiling, trying to organize what I was going to do from then on. Because one thing was clear, pretending was over. I could keep going on Saturdays, bringing bread, reading stories. But if every week she spent 6 days feeling fear inside that house, what good was my presence for a few hours? It was like giving a cup of water to someone imprisoned in the desert. I didn't want to be momentary relief. I wanted to be real shelter. I grabbed an old notebook and started noting everything that could be useful. Phone numbers of child psychologists I knew from the school days. Contact of a lawyer friend, in case it was necessary to understand my rights as a grandmother. I even wrote down numbers of child protection institutions. Not because I wanted to go to war with my son. God knows that destroyed me inside. But because, for the first time, I saw that if I didn't take her, stand, no one else would do it for her. Luna needed someone to say, "This is not right," even if it was just me. That same Saturday night, I sent a message to Andres. It was simple, direct. I wrote, "Tomorrow Luna will spend the day with me. We need to talk calmly on Monday. It's important." He saw it, but didn't reply. I didn't wait. I put Luna to sleep and spent some time sitting next to the bed, watching her breathe peacefully. And I thought, how long has it been since she slept like this? Because a child doesn't speak with words. She speaks with her body, her silence, her gaze. And that calm sleep told me I had done the right thing, as hard as it was. The next day, Sunday, I played with her all day. We went to the park, played memory game, baked a cake together. In every gesture of hers, I saw a lightness that had disappeared in recent months. Little by little, I realized Luna had gotten used to attention no child should carry. She asked all the time if she could do this or that, as if expecting scolding for everything. I said yes, of course, and she always answered with that, "Thank you, Grandma," that melted me. It was as if she were relearning to be a child. On Monday, after dropping Luna at school, I went straight to Andres' house. He was already waiting for me. He looked like he hadn't slept well. We sat in the living room, and for a few seconds we were silent. I knew he was trying to decide whether to defend himself or to listen. I was the one who broke the ice. I spoke calmly but clearly. I said that what happened on Saturday was serious. That seeing a child humiliated like that, even more by a father, is not only wrong, it's dangerous. And if he didn't recognize that, the situation would only get worse. He tried to justify again, saying he was stressed, that there was a lot of pressure at work, that Luna needed to learn to obey. But I didn't let it pass. I asked if he thought it was right to talk like that to a child who only wanted to help. And, more, if he thought it normal that Paola's children laughed at that. Only then did he seem to understand the size of what he had done. He lowered his eyes and stayed silent. And for the first time since I entered that house, I saw in his face a remnant of the boy who once trusted me for everything. I told him I would continue seeing Luna, but things were going to change. That I would no longer pretend everything was fine. That, if necessary, I would seek professional help, both for her and for him. And that I didn't care if this would create friction. My priority now was to protect my granddaughter. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he only said, "I need to think." I replied, "Think fast," and left. Because I could no longer walk on eggshells, not when it comes to a child's well-being. That same day, I scheduled a conversation with Luna's school counselor. I wanted to know how she was in the school environment, if she showed signs of sadness, fear, anxiety. The teacher was very kind, but also honest. She said that although Luna was a caring and intelligent girl, she had been showing herself withdrawn, sometimes even scared when someone raised their voice. That confirmed what I already knew in my heart. It wasn't an isolated episode. It was a pattern, and I would no longer allow that pattern to repeat in silence. On Tuesday, Andres showed up at my house in the late afternoon. He didn't warn. He just knocked on the gate and waited. I opened with my heart tight, not knowing what kind of conversation would come. But to my surprise, he didn't come to fight. He had his eyes down, deep, dark circles. He came in, sat in the kitchen chair and kept fiddling with his fingers, like he did when he was little and wanted to confess something. He said he thought a lot about what I had said, that he felt ashamed when he saw himself through my eyes, not as a man, but as a son, and that maybe he had gone overboard with Luna. Maybe, he said. I didn't jump for joy, nor did I cry with relief, because one thing is to recognize, another is to change. But just the fact that he came without pride was already a first step. I asked if he would agree to do family therapy. He hesitated, said he didn't know, that he had never done it, that he was afraid to open certain boxes. And I was honest. I said it was no longer a matter of wanting or not. It was a necessity. Because if he couldn't see himself, he would keep hurting the one who needed him most. He stayed silent but didn't say no. And that, at that moment, was already a lot. That same week, I contacted a psychologist specialized in family relationships. I scheduled a first appointment for myself, to understand how to handle all this in a balanced way. And then I arranged with her to start sessions with Luna. I wanted her to have someone outside to whom she could talk, someone who would listen without judgment. I explained everything carefully to Luna, saying it was a place where she could talk about everything she felt, even if it was difficult. She only asked, even if I say I was afraid of Daddy? And that broke me. I answered with my heart in my throat, especially if it is that, my love, because that's where change begins. Not in shouting, nor in confrontation. It is in that space where she can feel free to be who she is, to speak without fear, to not carry guilt that isn't hers. And if Andres really wanted to transform himself, he would have to do the same. Look inside, face the discomfort, learn to be a real father, not just someone who pays bills and imposes rules. I, as mother and grandmother, could no longer live trying to protect everyone from what nobody wanted to see. In the following days, I noticed Luna began to change her way of looking. She was still shy, still careful, but she no longer walked as if stepping on glass. Here at home, she started singing again, drawing for hours, laughing loudly. That free childish laugh that seems to cleanse the house's air. And I started noting these small victories in a notebook. It was my way of remembering that, even amid so much pain, we can still build healing, one day at a time. With small gestures, with safety, with listening. There was a night she slept hugging one of my jackets, saying its smell brought good dreams. I cried softly in the bathroom, because that said much more than words. Luna was rebuilding herself, and so was I. But at the same time, a fear came. What if one day Andresin thought I was distancing his daughter from him? What if he decided to cut my contact with her? I knew I had to act with caution, that it was no use creating a new war. But I also knew that now, my role was no longer to please. It was to protect. The following Saturday, I went to take Luna back to her house, as agreed. The farewell was hard. She asked me to stay one more day. She wanted me to read the new book we had started. She wanted to sleep with me, but I took a deep breath and explained we needed to respect the agreements, that keeping the routine was important. She nodded, but held my hand longer than usual. When I rang the bell, Andres himself opened. He looked at me differently. He seemed tired, but lighter. He thanked me, with all the letters, for staying with her. I only replied, "She is my granddaughter, Andres. I will never stop being here for her." And I left. I returned with a heavy yet relieved heart at the same time. Because even knowing there was still a long road ahead, I was sure something essential had changed. The silence had been broken. And when silence breaks, the cycle begins to crumble. It was that day that I started writing a letter, not to deliver immediately, but to keep ready. A letter for my granddaughter to read when she grows up. So she knows that, even when it seemed nobody saw, someone saw and acted. I began to keep that letter in my drawer, next to other memories I gathered over the years. Photos, notes, Luna's, drawings. Every time something important happened, I noted a passage. I didn't want her to grow up without knowing what she had lived. Not in a painful way, but with truth, because there are things we need to know to understand where our strength comes from. And I felt that one day, that letter could give her exactly that. A sense of belonging, of protection, of love that endured even when everything seemed to fail. At the end of that month, Andres called me saying he had started sessions with a therapist. He said he was trying to understand why he got so irritated, why he took it out on Luna. It wasn't a long or emotional conversation, but it was honest. I said I hoped he could find himself, because I knew his anger came from old, poorly healed wounds, from frustrations he never knew how to name. Only now he had a responsibility, and could no longer pass that on to a child. He listened, said, "I'm trying." For the first time I believed. Meanwhile, Luna and I created a routine of our own. Every Wednesday she came here after school, and we had the affection afternoon, as she herself named it. Sometimes we baked cookies, sometimes we painted, sometimes we just lay in the hammock and looked at the clouds. And in those moments, I saw what really heals a child. Presence. Not expensive gifts, not moral lessons. It's eye to eye, it's time, it's lap. It's knowing there is someone there who loves you even when you make mistakes. And I made sure to show that to her whenever I could. One day she looked at me in the middle of a play and said, "Grandma, here I can make mistakes, right?" And that echoed in my head. How many children grow up without that right? Without that space, I said. Yes, you can, my love. Here, making mistakes isn't danger. It's just part of learning. And it was at that moment I was sure I was doing what needed to be done. It was no longer about what would happen between me and my son, or between him and his wife. It was about what I could build with, Luna now, and that nobody would stop me. Over time, Paula began to show more resistance to my presence. She sent messages through Andres, asking if it wasn't exaggerated for Luna to spend so much time with me, or saying it was disturbing the house dynamics. But I didn't back down. I always said, as calmly as possible, that I would not distance myself from my granddaughter, and that if they wanted to talk about it, they should speak directly to me, never lacking respect, but also never diminishing myself to please anyone, because I understood that Saturday, that omission is also a form of violence. Once, during a family lunch, Paula made an acid remark. She only behaves well with you because you spoil her too much. I took a deep breath, I smiled, and replied, she behaves well because she feels safe. A child who feels safe blooms. The table fell silent. Andres looked at me with a mix of shame and gratitude, and I kept eating like someone who knows they did the right thing, because I no longer needed anyone's approval. My role there was clear. I was the pillar that remained. And for Luna, that was enough. There was a night, already near the end of the year, when Luna called me from her father's cell phone. She had a tiny voice. She asked if she could sleep at my house, even though it wasn't the agreed day. She said her mother was angry and she just wanted a place to stay quietly. My heart raced. I went to get her right away. I didn't ask details at that time. I just hugged her. The next day, more calmly, she told me she had dropped a glass of juice on the sofa, and her mother yelled a lot at her, said she was a nuisance. That took my breath away. That's when I realized the situation might be even more serious than I imagined. Because a child may overlook a scolding, a punishment, but words like that, said by someone who should protect, settle deep. They destroy inside. I knew I needed to act, but strategically. I started writing down everything. Records of phrases, attitudes, times, reactions. Not to use against anyone, but to have backing in case I needed to resort to something more formal. Because if one day it came to fighting for shared custody, I wanted to be prepared. I talked to Luna's psychologist about this situation. She listened attentively, took several notes, and confirmed the girl showed signs of anxiety. She said it wasn't something serious yet, but that the environment where the child lives directly influences how she perceives herself in the world. She advised me to keep the strong bond, to continue being that safe harbor. But she also suggested I consider reaching out to the Child Protective Council if new episodes like that happened. In other words, it wasn't exaggeration on my part. It was zeal. It was care. It was love in the form of attitude. That gave me even more firmness. Not to confront, but to act with clarity. I started studying more about grandparents' rights, about protective measures and how psychological follow-up works in delicate family situations. I didn't want to take Luna away from her father's coexistence. Far from it. I only wanted to ensure she had a space where she could grow without fear. And if for that I had to become the annoying person in the family, so be it. Because I was past the age of accepting wrong things just to maintain the appearance of harmony. In one of Luna's sessions, the psychologist called me to talk alone. She said that in one of the drawing activities, Luna drew a divided house. On one side, there was color, flowers, a hammock. On the other, everything was grey. And when they asked her what that was, she answered, "Here is Grandma's house. There is Mommy's." I had a lump in my throat. That said everything. The way she saw the spaces spoke more than any report. It was more than preference. It was a clear sign of where she felt good and where she didn't feel at peace. I returned home with that drawing in my head. I couldn't sleep. Well, I kept thinking about how a 6-year-old child can carry so much, and how we sometimes underestimate what they feel just because they still don't know how to put it into words. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with the school's social worker. I brought everything: notes, the psychologist's reports, and the history of episodes I had been documenting. I didn't want to report anyone. I wanted guidance. I wanted to know what I could legally do as a grandmother to ensure my granddaughter wouldn't be silenced again. The social worker was very attentive. She read everything calmly, asked questions, listened to each detail. At the end of the talk, she explained I could file a formal request for extended regular visitation, or even request a protected hearing for Luna if the episodes with the mother repeated. But she recommended that, before that, we try family mediation. She said that, in such cases, it is always better to try a path that preserves bonds, if there is openness. I agreed. I didn't want to break with anyone. I just wanted to ensure Luna would be truly heard. At the end of that week, I proposed to Andres that we participate together in a mediation session. He was a bit distrustful at first, said Paula probably wouldn't accept, but that he would go. I scheduled the first meeting. We went, and to my surprise, he was honest. He said he didn't know how to deal with his wife's way, that he felt suffocated, and that sometimes he let things slide for fear of creating more friction. He admitted he was failing as a father. That moved me, because I knew he had his wounds, but hearing him acknowledge gave me a thread of hope. The mediator proposed that Paula participate in the next session, and I confess I doubted she would go, but she went. She arrived serious, defensive, arms crossed the whole time. Even so, she listened. When the mediator asked how she saw the relationship with her stepdaughter, Paula said she did her best, that children have to learn to fend for themselves, and that Luna is very sensitive. I held myself back, but the mediator was firm. She said that sensitivity in a child is a sign of emotional intelligence, and that invalidating it could generate serious consequences. For the first time, I saw Paula swallow hard. On the way out, she didn't look me in the eye, but she also didn't argue, and that was already a victory. Little by little, I noticed these conversations were generating small changes. Nothing extraordinary, but signs. Andres started asking more about Luna, began picking her up from school sometimes, and even asked me for tips on how to handle her crying fits. I didn't romanticize. I knew it wasn't a fairy tale, but seeing my son trying, even stumbling, gave me the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was indeed a chance for reconstruction. At home, I kept the records, not out of distrust, but because I learned memory fails and documents are protection. I noted everything: days Luna slept here, phrases she said, attitudes I observed. That gave me a sense of control in a situation where everything seemed fragile, and, at the same time, allowed me to follow her development with more attention. I began to notice she was more confident, more talkative. She drew with more color, played with more freedom. That, for me, was the real measure of progress. One day, Luna came with a folded note in her backpack. It was a little letter made at school. Each child had to write about the place where they feel happiest. Hers said, "At my grandma's house, where I can breathe peacefully." I couldn't handle it. I cried reading those simple words, because there was everything. All the struggle, all the pain, all the silent resistance that had been happening since that Saturday. And there also was the answer. Even without understanding everything, Luna knew how to recognize where the love was genuine, and that gave me the strength to continue. As the months passed, things started to stabilize. Not completely, but more healthily. Andres remained in therapy. Paula, even without much enthusiasm, became more careful with her words. And I stayed firm, without giving up my presence. On special dates, like birthdays or Christmas, there was still some tension in the air, but they no longer treated me as a burden. Perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of fear. What mattered was that Luna still had a safe space. And that, in the end, was what I most wanted to ensure. But I never stopped being alert, because I know that a single oversight can bring everything back to how it was. A child is fragile, and an adult full of resentment turns into a time bomb. That's why I kept my talks with the psychologist, continued participating at school, maintained the routine of afternoons with Luna, and more than that, I started reconnecting with myself, to take care of my health, my desires, my rests, because I understood that, to be someone's support, we also need to be whole. And I had lost that for a long time. I went back to attending a reading group for women my age. It was every Thursday morning in a small library nearby. There, I met again a school friend, Mariella, who was also a grandmother and lived similar dilemmas. Our conversations did me good. They reminded me I wasn't alone, that being a mother of an adult and a grandmother of a child is a tightrope many people try to balance. Talking about all that outside the house, without judgment, brought me a lightness hadn't felt in a long time. I also started writing. Not just the letter for Luna, but small texts about what I was living. Things that maybe one day I would turn into a book or not. The important thing was to get it out. To record what hurts, what heals, what teaches. It was a way not to get sick. To remind myself that what happened that Saturday was a divider. One of those moments we never plan, but that changes everything. I didn't choose to see what I saw, but after seeing, I couldn't unsee, and pretending it didn't happen would be cowardice. With me, with her, there was a Saturday, months after that day, when Luna asked me if I remembered that time she was scared. I said I did, and I asked if she still felt that. She thought for a while and answered, "Less. Now I know you're with me." That dismantled me, because a child's security doesn't come only from walls or toys. It comes from constancy, from repeated affection, from knowing there is someone who will not disappear. And at that moment, I knew that even without changing the entire world, I had changed hers. Andres was different too. He still had his moments of hardness, but now apologized. He listened more. Sometimes, he called just to ask how his daughter was. Simple things, but for me they were big. I saw a real effort there. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of love, or both. It didn't matter. It mattered that he was trying to be better than that man I saw yelling that morning. And deep down, I hoped he could succeed, because after all, he was still my son. And nobody knows his wounds better than I do. Paola, on the other hand, remained an enigma. She never really approached me, nor made a point of building a bridge. She was always cordial but cold, and I learned not to expect more than that. What worried me, however, was the bond between her and Luna. It was evident there was a distance. The girl seemed to mold herself when near her stepmother, as if always trying not to bother. And that left me restless, because I knew how much that can mark someone in childhood. I knew that effective absence turns into a hole later on. One afternoon, Luna drew a family. There was her father, me, her, and even the stepbrothers. But Paula wasn't there. I asked why, and she said, "Because she doesn't like me." I didn't know what to answer. I breathed, bent down to her level and said, "Sometimes people have difficulties showing affection, but that has nothing to do with you. It has to do with them." She was silent but nodded. After that, I started working with the psychologist on ways to reinforce Luna's self-esteem without hiding reality, but also without feeding resentments she shouldn't carry. It was around that time I made a decision. I went back to giving volunteer reading classes to neighborhood children. A simple thing, twice a week in my own living room. Luna loved to participate. She felt like Grandma's helper, read along, organize the books. That strengthened her. It gave her meaning, structure, confidence. It was beautiful to see how, even so small, she already carried a sweet strength. And there, surrounded by other children, she bloomed. Helping others also became a way to heal herself. And I saw myself in her, as if looking at myself decades ago. On one of those days, while we arranged the books, she told me, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to have a house like yours." I asked why, and she answered, because here we can make mistakes, laugh, and eat. Warm bread. I smiled. That was everything. Because in the end, that's what a child needs. A place where she can exist without fear, where affection is simple, where mistakes don't turn into punishment, where silence isn't a threat but peace. And there, at that moment, I understood that what started as a Saturday of pain had turned into a project of love. On Luna's 7th birthday, I insisted on preparing everything here at home. I asked her how she wanted the party, and she answered without hesitation, with books, cheese bread, and the children from the group. I did exactly as she dreamed. I hung colorful flags, set up a table full of simple treats, and turned the living room into a mini city of stories. It was one of the happiest afternoons I had lived in recent times. Luna was radiant. She ran from one corner to another with that smile that reminded me of Andres when he was little. Before everything became responsibility and hurry, Andres came. He brought a nice present and stayed quite a while. He played with his daughter, talked with the other guests, and even offered to wash the dishes at the end. I saw there a man trying. Still shy, full of guilt perhaps, but trying. Paula didn't appear. She sent a cold message saying she was busy. Luna didn't ask about her, and that broke and relieved me at the same time. Because no child should get used to absence, but at least she didn't let that spoil her day. She was whole, present, happy, and that was all that mattered. That night, after everyone had left, Luna asked to sleep in the hammock. I wrapped her in a blanket and stayed there, sitting next to her, looking at the stars through the window gap. I thought of everything that had changed since that first Saturday. I thought about how, if I had ignored my instincts that day, maybe today everything would be different. Maybe Luna would be a quiet, withdrawn child, full of hidden fears. And maybe I myself would be living with the weight of having done nothing. Omission ages us in a cruel way. Acting, even with fear, gives life. Years ago, I said I didn't want to meddle in my son's life. Today I understand it's not about meddling. It's about being present when presence is necessary. Motherhood, even after children are grown, still demands courage from us. And the grandmother I became is only strong today because one day I was the mother who had to hold the world on her shoulders. Nothing was easy, but looking at Luna sleeping peacefully in that hammock with a serene face made me sure it was worth it, and that I would do it all again, as many times as needed. Shortly after, I received a call from the school. It was the principal, saying Luna had been chosen to present a reading project at a cultural fair. I was moved, not only because of the recognition, but because she herself had enrolled without anyone encouraging her. When I asked how she had the idea, she said, "I wanted to show others how good it is when we find a story." That hugs us. That sentence hit me, because that was exactly what reading had done for her, and maybe what I tried to do since that Saturday, to hug with presence. On the day of the presentation, I sat in the first row. I saw my granddaughter go up on the stage with a book in her hands and her hair tied the way I always do when she comes here. She took a deep breath and read firmly, in front of dozens of parents and children. I could hardly blink. That girl up there wasn't just a 7-year-old reading. She was living proof that love, when well planted, blooms. Afterwards, she gave me a tight hug and whispered in my ear, "It was for you." I stayed silent, tears rolling, because there was nothing more to say. On the way out, Andres thanked me again. He said that without me, he might not even be close to his daughter like today, that he was afraid of repeating patterns he himself suffered as a child. I held his hand for a moment. I didn't say everything's fine, because it wasn't. There was still much to heal. But I said, "What matters is that you started." He nodded. Sometimes, that's what is expected from an adult child, that he recognizes, that he takes responsibility, and that he is willing to change. The rest, time helps to adjust. Today, when I look back, I see everything began that Saturday. That day I went to deliver bread and found screams. When I entered through an ajar door and left with a shattered heart. But it was also the day something awoke in me. The part of the woman who doesn't stay silent, who doesn't bow, who doesn't outsource the responsibility of caring. And if I can leave something to Luna besides memories and books, I want it to be this: the certainty that she was never alone, that even when it seemed no one saw, someone saw and chose to act. After that episode at school, I began thinking about officially registering the bond Luna and I built. I talked to a lawyer friend, explained all the history, and she advised me to make a formal request for extended coexistence rights. It wasn't a process against anyone. It was a way to legally guarantee what already happened in practice, that Luna had in me a continuous pillar, recognized by law. Andres didn't oppose. Paula neither. Maybe out of weariness, maybe out of relief, the request was granted, and I felt something settled, as if that love finally had backing. With this security, I could breathe better. I started sleeping more peacefully, without that constant weight on my chest, and I noticed Luna was also more stable. The anxiety crises diminished, the silences grew shorter. She even began to invent stories with characters inspired by the two of us. I was always the wise owl of the forest or the grandmother who saved the village with magic books. I had fun with that, but I also saw there the reflection of how she saw me, as someone who protects, who guides, who teaches. And that, for me, was the greatest recognition I could receive. One ordinary morning, while we prepared breakfast, Luna told me, "Grandma, one day I want to have a granddaughter to do what you did with me." And I stopped. I held the spoon in the air, trying not to break down, because what she told me there wasn't just beautiful. It was profound. It was confirmation that something inside her was marked, not by the pain she suffered, but by the love she received afterward. And at that moment, I knew every effort was worth it. Every exposure, each meeting, each difficult conversation, every tear. Because, in the end, that's it. The way we love shapes what remains. We reached a point of balance. Andres is still in therapy. Paula keeps some distance, but no longer with aggressions. And Luna lives between the two homes with more lightness. Here, she still has her fixed afternoons, her stories, her pillow talks. I feel there is still much she will discover, will understand, over time. But at least, now, she grows knowing she has choice, that she has a voice, that she has a place where she is heard without fear. And me? I'm still here, old, tired sometimes, but whole. Because when we truly love, we discover strengths we didn't even know we had. Sometimes I wonder how Luna would be if I had arrived 10 minutes later that Saturday, or if I had thought it wasn't my business. The thought gives me chills, because the line between intervening and staying silent, when it comes to family, is very thin. And it's easy to convince yourself it's better not to get involved. But today I know, my silence that day would have been complicity. And nothing hurts more than realizing you had a chance to protect someone and chose to do nothing. Luckily, I didn't choose silence. There are days when I still feel fear, of setbacks, of relapses, of a new shout echoing where there should be a hug. But when that happens, I look at Luna, at how she calls me, how she curls up in my lap, how she feels free to say when she's sad or confused. And I realize that, even if the whole world collapsed, this bond would resist, because it was built in pain, yes, but also in courage, in care, in the daily decision not to give up. And no one can take that from us. Not time, not tiredness, not grudges. The other day, she asked me to record our readings. She said she wanted to hear my voice when she felt homesick. I began recording small audios, reading the stories we like most. I saved everything on a pen drive with her name. It's my gift for the future, a kind of invisible but powerful inheritance. Because when I'm no longer here, I want her to know I was. That I was in every word read, in every story shared, in every silent choice made out of love. And that, even without promising anything, I gave everything I could. And maybe that's what defines what we lived. A love that didn't make noise, but that transformed everything. It wasn't necessary to shout, threaten, or break up in scandal. It was enough to arrive at the right moment, say what needed to be said, and stay. Stay even when it was uncomfortable. Stay even when I was misunderstood. Stay for her. Because love, when true, doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. It simply does. And what I did for Luna wasn't heroism. It was instinct. It was the answer to something my heart shouted before reason understood. Nowadays, the door of my son's house no longer causes me that tightness in my chest. It's still hard. Sometimes. The memory of that Saturday still lives in me. But now, when I ring the bell and Luna runs to hug me, I feel something has been remade. Not like the form, maybe it never will be, but in a new way, truer, more conscious. No one pretends everything is fine anymore. Conversations are more honest, boundaries clearer, and the love that exists, that yes, remains. Even with cracks, it is still there. And that's enough. Time also taught me not to expect perfect reparations. I learned to accept middle grounds. Andres didn't become another man, but he tries. Paula didn't become a mother, but she seems to respect spaces better. And Luna, my Luna, keeps growing as a smart, sensitive, resilient girl. She still has fears, like every child. But now she knows she can talk about them. That she has someone who listens, who validates, who embraces. And this is perhaps the greatest legacy a grandmother can leave. The security of being seen, even when no one else looks. Now and then they ask me why I kept insisting. Why I didn't distance myself. Why I didn't drop everything and protect myself from the where. And the answer is simple. Because she was my granddaughter. Because I saw her born, rocked her in my arms, taught her to read. Because I recognized in that scared look something I had seen before, in myself, many years ago. And because I knew that, if I did nothing, maybe she would grow up thinking nobody ever would. And that, I could never accept. Not while I had the strength to hold her hand. This story doesn't have a happy ending. It has continuity. It's about wounds that turned into scars. About bonds that were remade carefully. About presence. About not turning away. And about what happens when a woman, even tired, chooses to remain. If you've come this far, maybe you've lived something similar. Maybe you were the one who held firm, even not knowing how. And if that's the case, I can only tell you one thing. You are not alone. May we never underestimate the power of an attentive heart, because sometimes it is the heart that changes everything. Last week, while I was putting away some old books, I found that first drawing Luna made right after the Saturday when everything changed. The one with the colored house on one side and the gray on the other. I kept it in a folder, among the notes and slips I gathered over time. I looked at that paper for long minutes in silence, and I thought, maybe I will never be able to paint the gray side completely, but I could teach her that color exists, that laughter exists, that there is another way of existing in the world, and that by itself already transforms entire futures. On Sunday, she came to spend the day with me. While we played building a city with blocks, she said, "When I grow up, I want to write a book with the story of two houses, one with silence, another with hugs." I smiled, swallowed the tears, and replied, "It will be a beautiful book, because that is what she carries now, the chance to tell her own story without fear. And if one day she forgets what she lived, she will have my recorded voice, my saved notes, and the trail of every choice made out of love. She will never need to doubt that she was protected." At night, before sleeping, she hugged me and said, "Thank you for never giving up on me." And I thought, if the whole world had turned its back, this hug would have already been worth everything. Because, in the end, what saves a life is not a grand act. It's the everyday gesture. It's who stays when everything goes wrong. Who says no when it's easier to stay silent. Who sees when no one else wants to see. And I, Teresa Ramirez, chose to see. And I don't regret it, because that Saturday I could have stayed outside. But I went in, and I never stopped being there. If you stayed with me until now, thank you. Sometimes all we need is someone who truly sees, who says, "This is not normal," when the world insists on calling it an exaggeration. And maybe you have also lived something like this, or known someone who did. A moment when it was necessary to choose between comfortable silence and painful action. And if you chose to act, you know how much that marks. Tell me in the comments if this story reminded you of something, or if you have ever gone through a situation where you needed to protect someone, even being misunderstood for it. Sometimes it is in each other's experiences that we find the courage to continue. If you can, share this video with someone you think needs to hear this today. Sometimes, a real story arrives at the right time and lights a spark that seemed extinguished for a long time. And if you want to keep listening to stories like this, of ordinary people who live what almost nobody dares to tell, stay with us here. There is still a lot of life to be told. And every life, when listened to with the heart, can become shelter for someone.